Lincoln said, show me a religion that believes in just one thing. Love one another as you love yourself, and I will belong to that religion. Unfortunately, most of them add all kinds of rules and regulations.
Former New York Governor Mario Cuomo today on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson. Abraham Lincoln may be the most written about American ever. By some estimates, there have been 15, 16, maybe 18,000 books about Abraham Lincoln. One of them was a 2004 book by the Democratic former governor of New York, Mario Cuomo. Now, despite the fact there are thousands of books about Lincoln, Cuomo decided to call his Why Lincoln Matters. Now, as he explained to me when we talked about his book in the summer of 2004, Lincoln matters because he transcended political party divisions. After all, Lincoln was a Republican, Cuomo a Democrat, and he also symbolized certain principles that go to the bedrock of why the country was founded and what it means to be an American. Now, at the time of this interview, the 2004 presidential campaign was just beginning to heat up. It was just days after the death of Ronald Reagan, both of which you'll hear talked about during the interview. So in just a moment, my conversation with Mario Cuomo.
They say what's old is new again. You're about to see if that's true as you listen to an interview from noted radio personality Bill Thompson's 30-year archive. Enjoy.
So here now, from 2004, Mario Cuomo.
I had done a book on Lincoln some years ago that won some prizes, Lincoln on Democracy, which I really edited and put together some of the great Lincoln historians to focus on Lincoln's specific writings on the subject of democracy. And ever after that, the publishers asked me to do another book on that. And I said, look, I'm not an historian. I'm a public person, basically, and I don't want to write about Lincoln's speeches, Lincoln's shoes, Lincoln's... Then came 9/11. Then came the first memorial of 9/11. And I received a phone call that said before the memorial, if you were still governor, what do you think you'd say at the memorial? I said, wow, that is really a daunting prospect. And I don't know. I really don't know. I'm looking forward to seeing what Governor Pataki, Mayor Bloomberg, and former Mayor Giuliani say, because they were the three speakers. Well, they came, and they didn't say a word other than read names and read Lincoln. And it occurred to me that what they were saying implicitly is what politicians of both the parties have said for years, and that is Lincoln is more than a revered relic. He is relevant. They're constantly, Bill Clinton has had our book, Lincoln on Democracy, next to him, he said, in the bedroom. Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, etc. I said, well, if he's relevant, why don't we ask him about preemptive war? Because he spoke to Herndon about preemptive war. Mm-hmm. Why don't we ask him about this budget that gives $1 trillion in taxes over the next 10 years to the top 2%? He invented the income tax, Lincoln. Why don't we ask him about multilateralism and religion, stem cells? They say that he was a religious person. Was he really? Would he talk about faith the way Bush talks about faith? And so I got that idea. I talked about it at a dinner party once, and somebody happened to be there from Harcourt Brace, and they said, will you talk to the editors? I talked to the editors, didn't even do an outline. And they said, we love the book, and how fast can you do it? I said, I can do it very fast. I'll use Harold Holzer, who used to work for me and who is a legitimate Lincoln scholar. I have been reading Lincoln since 1955, Bassler's collected works, and I know what I want to say and what Lincoln said, but I need the quotes, and I want to be absolutely sure it's authenticated, and that's what Harold's done. So it is an attempt to use the obvious truth, which is politicians have been relying on Lincoln for years, and to be just a little bit more explicit about it this time. Preemptive war, religion, opportunity. How would he feel about the working class that he was so concerned about? He said they're more important than labor. Labor is more important than capital. What would he say to us today? And that's the inspiration for the work, and that's what it's about.
But as you point out in the book, Lincoln transcends the easy pigeonholes that we try to put politicians into these days.
Oh.
You couldn't easily put a label on him.
No, he's very hard to label. And I was thinking about that this week here in early June, speaking so much about Ronald Reagan. And he, too, was very distinctly labeled as a conservative and the conservative paladin, the summing up of modern conservatism. And I find that odd, frankly, because he wasn't that way. And if you look closely at his record, I was a governor while he was the president, and so I felt the force of his policies in a very distinct way. And I loved him. I think he made a contribution to this country just by virtue of his character that is as great as any president has made in that regard. And that's very important, and that's why he's being so honored today, I think. But Lincoln and Reagan were practical, pragmatic, and progressive. As a governor, Ronald Reagan signed the most liberal abortion law in the country, and he raised taxes. Now, of course, as president, we had Reaganomics and Reaganism, but that, David Broder points out, only lasted a couple of years. Mm-hmm. The tax cut happened very early. I know, it was 1981, mm-hmm. and it was huge. But then the deficit was so bad that followed. See, he predicted he would balance the budget in 3 years with a tax cut and putting more money in the defense budget. Mm-hmm. And people said, how? He said, don't worry, the magic of supply side. And it didn't work. Thereafter, Reagan raised taxes 6 times, including the Social Security tax. So he was very intelligent, and he understood, look, a tax cut is good, but I can't do it without devastating my budget. I have to raise taxes. And so he did. I wish, frankly, President Bush would consider that. Now that he's thinking about raising them a 3rd time, these tax cuts, he should consider passing over, and I say this in the book, passing over this $1 trillion for the 2% wealthiest people. I'm sure Ronald Reagan would have. He would not have allowed the deficit this way. So Reagan is known as a conservative. He did believe in shrinking government. There's no question about that. But he wasn't the conservative that our current President Bush is.
But Lincoln, even if he'd had a team of pollsters who could have gone out and put their finger to the wind, would not have operated that way. Lincoln had principles that guided everything that he did.
Both Lincoln and Reagan would be saying to President Bush today, in my opinion, listen, Lincoln would say, I invented the progressive income tax. It was unconstitutional, and they had to do it over, but I could, because I needed it for the war. Mm-hmm. And you need something like that for the war. You shouldn't be giving those super wealthy people $1 trillion over the next 10 years when you've got this war to pay for that you didn't figure on, when you have education problems and you have health care problems, and health care is going up 12 to 20% a year, and 47 million people don't have it. You should skip that tax cut. I'm not going to ask you to raise taxes. You're too much of a conservative for that. But I'm sure Lincoln would say to him, and so would Reagan, because Reagan proved it. He raised the taxes. He would say to him, look, if you can't raise them, then at least don't cut them. Just stop that cut that is going forward. I'm sure that would be their advice to George Bush.
Now, unfortunately, as you point out in your book, Lincoln's advice to Bush when it comes to detaining people in time of war and having secret tribunals, secret charges, that's advice maybe Mr. Bush shouldn't have taken from Abraham Lincoln.
I think that's right, Bill, and that's what I say in the book. There are things that they have in common. They both we're talking now about Lincoln and the current President Bush. They both won without much distinction in their races. Lincoln, as we know, got less than 50% of the vote, very much less. And when he did finally get 50% in the second vote, it's because the other guys didn't vote. The South didn't vote. He was voted in without a mandate. So was the current President Bush. Everybody remembers the controversy in Florida. And then they were immediately struck with crises, the Civil War and terrorism, and they have that in common. They were rural type people. I mean, they liked the rural life, both of them. So they have that in common. And they both talked about faith a lot, although Lincoln talks about it in a slightly different way than President Bush. President Bush insisted on talking about it as a Christian kind of, and when he refers to being a person of faith, he means the Christian faith. President Lincoln wasn't quite like that. So they had a lot in common, for better and for worse. Both these presidents seized the opportunity, the so-called war on terrorism in Bush's case, the real war of secession in Lincoln's case, to manipulate the Constitution in a way that some purists would say was inappropriate, unfair, and not allowed, not intended to be allowed by the Founding Fathers. I am one who thinks that Lincoln went too far, and one who thinks that parts of the Patriot Act, not all the Patriot Act, but parts of it go too far. And that this recent memorandum that says torture is okay, and this, those things.
What would Lincoln say to that?
Well, Lincoln did have problems of torture and bad treatment in prison camps, etc., on both sides of the line, the Confederates and the Union, and there were a lot of conversations about that. But President Lincoln always made it clear that he was opposed to it and sought to discourage it.
After this short break, Mario Cuomo talks about Lincoln, Bush, and the Supreme Court.
AI is not just for 22-year-old coders. A lot of us older adults are drawing on our life experience to find unique and creative ways to use AI, at home or at work. Got an AI success story you'd like to share? Tap the link below to visit our YouTube channel, AI After 40, and let's keep learning together.
Now back to my 2004 conversation with Mario Cuomo.
You're right. Both Lincoln and Bush took liberties, let's say, with the Constitution. They both also did this. They were very political about how they selected people for the Supreme Court. Now, Lincoln had the chance to do it and did it, but President Bush hasn't had the chance yet, but it's clear what he's going to do. He's going to pick people who agree with him on Roe against Wade, and he's picked them for the lower courts. He's doing it politically. So did Roosevelt, so did Lincoln, so did Reagan, so did all the presidents. As an old-fashioned lawyer, I think they were all wrong. I don't think you should pick a judge on the basis of his or her political view. It's how good a lawyer they are and how good a judge they're going to be, which is a different thing entirely, but that's purely for the purists.
Well, don't they get their comeuppance anyway when those justices then make decisions that they had never anticipated they would make?
I say this in the book, Bill. I say exactly that. I said, fortunately, our salvation has been that you appointed Souter, as, thinking he was going to be a conservative just because he spent a lot of time in the woods and he fooled you. And you appointed people from the KKK in the old days who proved to be quite progressive and fair and great judges. So yeah, they often disappoint the president, and that's to the good.
I think one of the themes of your book also is that we lack this overarching, what the first President Bush would have called the vision thing, the ability that Lincoln had to be able to see clearly what the United States of America needs to be and who we are.
Bill, there are people who are task-oriented, who are short-sighted, myopic even, and there are people of vision, the vision thing, whose mind embraces large ideas. That's what Lincoln was. He spoke to the ages, literally. Although he was locked into the United States in what was a primitive time compared to today with all that's happened with the internet and technology, etc., still he spoke always about the importance of the American experiment to the whole world. And in his last years particularly, talked about China and his own hemisphere a great deal. He only stepped outside the United States briefly to go to Niagara Falls, believe it or not. And in New York, we don't even count that as Canada, But still, he spoke to the ages, and he spoke huge ideas. He believed in one idea mostly, I think, interconnectedness and interdependence of all people. Certainly in this country, we're all one. The blacks, the greens, the orange, we're all one. Forget about slavery. And forget about South and North. We have to be one country. That union meant everything to him. But he went beyond that. He said our American experiment and the equality of the Declaration of Independence and that high aspiration of the Declaration of Independence that locks us all together as human beings, that's a lesson to the whole world. So his philosophy was, you're all in this together, be nice to one another, and work together to make a better society. And that's his advice to the whole world. And that's what we're seeing now with globalization and multilateralism. It's obvious that as strong as we are, and there's never been a nation this strong, we're not strong enough to go it alone. We were just reminded of that in the Security Council. We're delighted now, even though they're not going to give us their army, that we got 15 votes saying, well, we're with you morally at least. And so that was Lincoln. That wasn't President Bush when he began, in all candor. When he began, he thought, hey, forget about nation building, forget about the rest of the world, forget about the Kyoto Protocol, we don't need them. We're the hegemon. We can do it on our own. Well, I think he's getting closer to where Lincoln always was now in his own mind, because he's beginning to understand, look, whether you like it or not, we're all in this together. Incidentally, Bill, those two principles, that we human beings owe something to one another, and that together our mission is to make this place better, that's the beginning of Judaism. Tzedakah and Tikkun Olam. Tzedakah, you're supposed to love one another. Tikkun Olam, together we'll repair the universe. It's also the fundamental proposition of Roman Catholicism and Christianity generally. That's Christ. Love one another as you love yourself for the love of me, which Lincoln said when asked, what religion would you belong to if you had to choose one? He says, show me a religion that believes in just one thing. Love one another as you love yourself, and I will belong to that religion. He said, unfortunately, most of them add all kinds of rules and regulations, and a lot of those I can't live with, so I don't belong to any particular religion. And so he wasn't a religious person the way George Bush is. George Bush has a church, and he believes in the Christian church, et cetera, the Christian faith. President Lincoln talked a lot about the Creator and the first force, but he bought a pew for his wife, but he never used it.
Does John Kerry get it? Does he understand the Lincolnian principles you're talking about?
Bill, that's an unfortunate part of this book. When I wrote it, and it was written 4 or 5 months ago, it takes that long just to produce the darn thing, and they set a record producing this one. He had, there was very little that he had said publicly. Now that he has been around talking a great deal and he's taken a lot of positions, he's strapped because he doesn't want to be in a position where he's contradicting the president too much on the subject matter of war, because it's just inconvenient for the country to do that. Now, before this election's over, right now it's Bush against Bush in early June 2004. It's Bush against Bush, and Bush is losing because everybody's watching him. Why? Because terrorism, because our children are dying there, because it's terrible, and so there's a scandal or whatever. So we're focused on Bush. But Bush will never lose the presidency because of his unpopularity. He will lose only if Kerry, at the very end, makes it obvious to the American people that he's a better choice. They'll settle for Bush unless Kerry gives them a reason not to. No matter how far down he goes, they're not going to remove him as president, in my opinion, unless Kerry gives them an alternative. And so he will have to speak, and he will have to distinguish himself from Bush. He will have, and forget about, look, it's inconvenient, because now it's Judgment Day, and they're going to go into those polls. You have to say, what would you have done differently? What will you do differently? What capacity do you have that this man does not? So far, he hasn't said that clearly.
I hope that we're able to have a campaign this year that will not center on issues like, are you a member of the ACLU? Do you belong to the National Rifle Association? Do you believe in the Pledge of Allegiance? Can we get a substantive discussion this year?
Well,
that was what your son wrote about actually last year.
Absolutely, and he was right, and he is right, and I think it's a little bit easier to do it now because you have two big chunks of real substance that you can't avoid. One is, how do you deal with this terrorism? Mm-hmm. Can you do it just with military force? Do you think you can stop terrorists who are all over the world, don't belong to any particular nation, don't have any particular boss except for Osama, but there are plenty of other bosses when you take him down, and are willing to give up their life to take yours? Do you think you can beat them just by frightening them with death or killing them? I was a governor. For 12 years. I built more prison cells than all the governors in New York State history before me put together. Why? Because of a stupid law called the Rockefeller Law that makes you put people who are drug implicated, even if they're not violent, in jail. I know this for sure. I come from a very poor and tough neighborhood. I've lived in New York City all my life. You will not stop crime with prison cells, courts, and police, no matter how many you have. You have to do more. You have to stop whatever it is that produces the instinct for crime. And to say, oh, root causes, that's liberal. No. Root causes, that's common sense. Mm-hmm. Figure out why these people are the way they are and see if we can't change that. I'm not saying diminish the army. You're going to have to build up this army. That's clear.
That's a very Lincolnian view, actually, of what you've been talking about.
That's exactly right.
Mario Cuomo died in 2015. He was 82. Now, you can get your copy of Why Lincoln Matters by Mario Cuomo by tapping the link on our show notes, by clicking the link in the description below if you're watching this on YouTube, or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. HeardEverything.com is where you can also find my 2005 conversation with historian Doris Kearns Goodwin.
In Lincoln's hands, the qualities that we normally associate with decency, with a good person, sensitivity and honesty and empathy and kindness, became great political resources.
And my 2003 conversation with Mario Cuomo's son, Andrew Cuomo.
One side attacks the other, you have to respond, you have to counter with a worse attack. It happens to be correct tactically in a campaign. I think it stops when the American people demand that it stops.
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you can find us wherever you find podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, a conversation with a true country music legend who was long married to another longtime country music legend, my 1988 conversation with June Carter Cash.
Time goes by. I've suffered some in my life. I've gone through some rough times, but I've had some wonderful, good, great years with Johnny Cash, and I wouldn't trade my life anyway. We must have done something right.
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.